Morning, everyone. Welcome to the Hermitage. I'm Ajahn Cunda. Hope everyone is doing well this morning. It's nice to have good companions in the holy life and also good weather. Hope everyone is hearing me. Seem to have found out a little bit of a problem with the audio, and that is fixed, but I'm hoping it's not too loud. It looks like it is a little bit loud, so I'm going to adjust that. Please let me know if that is still too loud. And so today we'll have a fair amount of activity at the Hermitage, and just have a cleanup this morning with my venerable friends, a couple of hours looking after the house, and then after the meal I'm going to go get my second COVID shot, vaccine. I'm not getting the virus. And so I'm in certain ways looking forward to that. There's an anticipatory experience in regards to getting the vaccine, at least for myself, sort of waiting to get it, and you get it, and you have a second one. So that's about it for the day, and tomorrow we'll have our garden party, and that'll start around 10:15, 10:30 a.m. People will come, and then we'll have the meal at 11, and we'll have our garden work between 1 and 3, and then 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock we will have some tea, and that'll be the day. So anyone is welcome to come. Just please wear masks, social distancing, and if you have garden tools, it's helpful to bring. So without further ado, I'll begin a bit of a Dhamma reflection. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang anuttarang upajayang namasami. So one of the things I just mentioned this morning was going to get the second shot of the vaccine, and I've been reflecting a bit recently about health and our sort of views of our own health, or how we experience our bodies and think about health and sickness, illness. This was precipitated a little bit by a conversation I was having with a writer who was interviewing me about a book questioning the digital age and whether our movement towards that was so sort of permanent in a way. I'm sure there will be something beyond digital, but he was saying that people are returning to analog. And so that one thing that came up around that as he was talking with me was just the sense that this year, for many people who have been inside, that has seemed to promote a sense of being, getting into habits that aren't so skillful around our use of technology. And one thing I was likening is that the more that we pay attention to things like our cell phones or our whatever it is, the latest streaming company or application, or all of the ways that the gaming that people do, online gaming and everything else, it really does it does have a sense that people are in those modes often divorced from their own bodies, even with the sense that we can meditate with certain applications. And I do have to say, I'm sure that there are many skillful ways that technology can be used. So I don't want to have a sense that that's not the case. But I would say for the vast majority of people, and this is just a guess, seeing how my own mind can incline towards technology, that there is a sense of moving into it in unskillful ways. And what I'm likening that to in terms of health is that we move away from the experience of our bodies. And we're not aware of our bodies, when we're paying attention to the digital world. But it's possible, for example, if all of you who are listening now are actually paying attention to not only your experience of seeing me, it might actually be helpful to close your eyes, but you can, at the same time that you're listening, tune into your bodies, turn into your experience of breathing, tune into your experience of your whole body, what that feels like, heart rate, where you feel the breath. There can be all kinds of ways that are helpful to pay attention to in terms of while we're actually engaged in activity. And so using technology is just one of them. And so during the pandemic, there's been, I think, a lot more use of this. Kids are just used to getting on a screen and interacting with their teachers and other students in that way. And many people are used to that. And in fact, I guess there's a phenomena of just finding that this is better for companies or corporations. People work at home. There doesn't need to be as much collaboration. And so the problem is that when we're engaging with technology, it's often very distracting, and we lose our sense of our bodies. And this can be a very unfortunate degree of separation for us. It can be a sense that we're no longer aware of the fact that there's this walking entity that we carry around. I think some of you are aware of, I don't think I mentioned this last time, I touched on this subject a little bit, but how there are some people who've actually died using some of these technologies. I'm just talking about like gaming and the sort of extreme cases of people spending so many hours gaming that they forget to eat. Probably they forget to sleep until they're just probably falling asleep while they're playing the game. They can forget to drink water. And a few of these people have died. So that to me is an incredible extreme sign of the loss of body awareness, the loss of experiential awareness. And we're just kind of thinking that we're heads on sticks, and the body just carries around this head that we're constantly using in terms of our six senses. And so that's just one way I think we need to try to tune out of the technology and tune into our present moment. And for many of us, this can be seen in how often we use these things, how often we need to check our phones or check email or whatever it is. And it's often helpful to develop boundaries around these, to develop ways that we can not be with technology. We can just enjoy our experience of being with our own bodies. We can enjoy our experience without being around technology, because the moment that we are in using it for distraction, for sort of entertainment value, to tune into, to get the next sensual input, I would guess that there's sort of higher endorphin levels each time one checks an email or sends it off, or probably I'm a bit dated even using that word email. I think people probably use a lot of other technologies to communicate as well. I think there's Instagram and other things I'm not so aware of. Facebook. Anyway, I don't actually know that much. I just tend to use email. Occasionally, I can use these video video means of communication, like Google Meet or FaceTime, and even that is something that can distract us from what it is we're experiencing. We're seeing an image of another person and ourselves. There's a lot of sort of presentation, but I guess we can say there is the potential for more connection in that when you're actually interacting with a human being. Anyway, with how we kind of go about our daily lives, my point is that we can be very divorced from our own experience and for what it is that we are dealing with in terms of our awareness, our attention, and how it is that we can actually utilize that to understand suffering, to understand what it is that we're doing. So I'd like to just try to encourage people to learn ways that you can put distracting technologies down, and most of them are distracting, but watching your own ways of distracting is quite important. So so that would be just maybe times that you utilize something, or it could be a sense of how much time when you're using something, like how much time do you spend writing an email, or how much time do you spend being entertained on a device. And so I think limiting that, most of us are aware of this, I think it's still good to hear. Eliminating that is quite important, and I think can be very helpful in terms of the amount of time, but also what it is that we're actually doing with it. What are we paying attention to? I remember one of the monks, I was quite interested in something he was doing with technology. He was trying to figure out how to essentially get into the jhanas using biofeedback, and he had developed a cloth helmet with servos all over the helmet, and was trying to give himself feedback because there is evidence that this can be done. And there are tests that have been conducted with neurologists, and they're able to teach novices novice meditators how to become master meditators within a very short period of time. But the question is do we still then need those novice meditators to become, I wouldn't call them masters, but they seem to be able to replicate and duplicate what the findings were for master meditators, people who had been meditating for many years and were able to concentrate their minds, collect their minds quite easily. But the question was, does this technology do you still have to wear it? Do you still have to wear a helmet and use this technology in order to get there? And so if that's the case, then one is dependent on this. So one tool that we have is mindfulness, and if we're being mindful, then we actually don't need so much feedback, because that is our feedback when we're aware. We get to be present with our experience, and for many that's enough to tell us whether we're actually paying attention in by just seeing it. We're getting basically the feedback that we need by just seeing, oh yeah, this is what mindfulness is. I'm able to pay attention to my present moment experience, to pay attention to a wholesome object, to continue to remember to bring the mind back to that object, and to observe whatever it is we're observing in the moment within our current experience. So there are technologies that can be helpful to us, or as I was saying, meditation technologies. I think there are a few, even one developed by a former monk that's very popular. The name is escaping me right now. Headspace, I think it's called. So how do we kind of, and I'm interested if anybody wants to comment, what are some ways that people utilize their own use of the Dhamma in order to detach or gain some space around the input that we're having from technology and how much that's divorcing us from our physical bodies. So one of the, as I was talking about, it can be difficult to develop good habits around something that's so essentially appealing as to how we use technology. And I know that some people I speak to are not necessarily in this particular space of needing to be around it. Some people do not turn on televisions, do not have cell phones, which is shocking to hear. Some people try to use as little as possible. That kind of requires them to be addicted to these ways that require all of our, or much of our awareness and attention in order to use them. So I think that that's one means, is just to just put it down and see in what ways we don't have to actually, for example, drive to work. People cannot own cars. These are all things that most people have heard, but how many of us are doing it? I know I can struggle with technology in terms of, as a monk, I really don't want to be spending so much time with it. But then I can see, for example, my own perfectionist tendencies and the sense that I have of wanting to make things sort of correct. One of the monks here was telling me how I need to change the image here a little bit, move the Buddha Rupa in a particular way, or sit, sit in the center, whatever. He had an opinion about how to make it better. And so that's one of the problems, is we're always searching for something better. If any of those of you who have more of a perfectionist tendency, you can see this with how we tend to use technology, whether we correct our particular emails or whatever messages we send out, and several times before we send it, or we want it worded well, or whatever. Or we can have particular judgments of people who don't do that. So I think that the main point of all of this is that we need to try to be more aware of what our experience is, and when we have unwholesome or unskillful states of mind that comes from relating to technology, and that comes from seeing this divorce that we have from our own experience of sort of putting a pause in, that sense of like that there is a separation from sort of all the entertainment that we have and this experience we have of our own minds. And when we do that sort of unplugging, if you will, plugging into the Dhamma and unplugging from all of these distractions, there is a wonderful sense of peace that can arise. There's an extreme, there can be very pleasant feelings of just being unburdened by all of the inputs that we put into our lives. Something so simple as like making a cup of coffee. I know I can watch myself kind of get a little bit too elaborate in just a cup of coffee. What does it need? You just grind some beans and put some hot water on it. Same for tea. But then you add something to it, maybe a sweetener or a creamer or anything, whatever it might be. And it gets more and more complicated. But we want things to be just right. And that just right is often a distraction for us, because as most of the people who are listening know, who have practiced Buddhism for a while, nothing is just right. The only thing that's just right is Nibbana. But along the way, we can get to pretty close to just right by letting go, and by being in this state of peace that I'm talking about, when we step back and we take a pause and we come back to what it is that we're experiencing. Interestingly enough, our own minds are entertaining enough for us in terms of just all of the intricacies that come up when we watch it. When we're examining our minds, it's quite a show. It's not an easy skill to have a sense of what it is we're experiencing. It's not something that is very clear to know the permutations of the mind and the different states that are arising. Sometimes it's hard to know. It gets so subtle that it's hard to know when something is moving in a particular skillful direction or not. We can think that it is, and then all of a sudden we're trapped by something like grasping onto whatever the state it is that we're experiencing. And so there is a really important quality that we want to encourage in ourselves, and that is an interest in what it is that we're doing, and kind of looking for that interest. And without having that, we can get very bored by our meditative experience, by our observation of our own bodies or our mind states. And that is the sort of the function of meditation, is we're learning how to look. It's not just that we're looking, it's not just that we're examining our own experience, we're learning how to do that in a way that, again, brings us to a different happiness. A happiness that is through letting go rather than sensual input. And once we gain more of that happiness, we're not wanting to be so distracted by the world. In this case, most of you have heard this word coarse when it comes to sensuality. We regard it as something coarse once we've started to delight in the subtleties of our meditative experience. And so we kind of can get to a point in meditation where why would I want to be associated with that? It's especially the case that even if we know that something is pleasant in our sensual experience, we know something's going to taste good or smell good or whatever it is that we're, or looking. That's what we're often doing, is using our eyes for that enjoyment. But then we see, why would I want to get mixed up in that? Because that's causing so much distraction. I lose my ability to be able to stay with the more subtle and pleasant experiences of peace. And so we start to see that we don't want to move into sensuality. We would rather have experiences that are more subtle and calming, rather than getting us sort of trapped and excited about sensuality. It's interesting. I'm just reflecting on how we move with the Dhamma, how we understand the Dhamma, and how it moves with us. So I had begun this talk actually with a sense of trying to talk about health and illness, and then it moved into technology, which is often that things can change, and sort of in a Dhamma talk, for example, one needs to just go with the flow if it's happening, if it's working out in that way. And so when we're looking at the Dhamma, we are in the current moment of what we're doing, kind of allowing our experience to inform us. What is it that we're interested in? What is it that we particularly are sort of lighting up with? And this can have a case. It can be the case for many people. For example, when they're thinking about the Dhamma, we talked about reflection in the last Dhamma talk, based on a question that Gabriel had, and that's often what we're trying to do, is we're trying to utilize, like, what is it that's coming up in our own experience that can inform us about our own understanding of the Four Noble Truths, our understanding of why we experience stress and how we are doing that to ourselves. We're creating that stress in our lives. And so one of the advantages of a clear mind that isn't moving towards distraction, as I've been talking about in this Dhamma talk, is that we actually have the capacity to reflect. We have the capacity to look into our experience and say, that's interesting how different mind states, for example, come from different pain in the body or sensations of our emotional states. This is sort of what can be driving us, and we can be off in an instant into particular thoughts that, again, don't move away from the Dhamma, but we can also train our minds to really pay attention when we're peaceful and calm, to sort of trace the Dhamma, to have an understanding of it. To kind of see, oh, is this what equanimity is? Is this, just this sort of letting go of adverse experiences within the mind, stories that I bring up with myself. And so that's very helpful. We can start to utilize the Dhamma rather than moving into necessarily a state of just being aware of it. We begin to understand how we can utilize the Buddha's teachings in our own experience. And again, this comes from an undistracted mind. And it's possible to move in that direction and allow ourselves to end this sort of divorce that we have with our own bodies and our own experience. Because once we concentrate on Dhamma, that has a way of sort of reciprocal learning, where we are gaining understanding in terms of what it is that we're doing, and we're saying, oh, this is what the Buddha means, or I see what's going on here. So it's quite helpful to try that in your meditation. You can ask yourselves, for example, what is the experience right now? Is there dukkha present? Am I grasping at anything right now? And we can often feel that when we're not so divorced from our body. We can see that grasping just in that kind of sense of tension, or the tension around our eyes. We learn to relax those. We learn to relax our shoulders, all kinds of different muscles in our bodies. And we can only do that usually by paying attention to what it is we're experiencing. That's why this word concentration often isn't such a helpful word to think about, because it implies that we're kind of moving in a one-pointed state of kind of keeping everything out, and we're forcing our minds into a particular mode that is excluding everything else, and that can require a lot of not only force but movement that's effortful and in certain ways painful, because it takes so much of our strength, our mental strength, to do it. Whereas if there's more a sense of collectedness, how do we collect our minds? Then we're sort of kind of paying attention to the fruits of what it is we're experiencing, and we're seeing that positive qualities arise when we bring our mind to our present moment experience, and we can see that pleasant experience arising, and that's sort of informing us to keep this collectedness moving in the right direction. So for some of you, when you're actually dealing with formal meditation, this can tend to be easier. But when we're not dealing with that, when we're not actually doing something like deliberately sitting or walking and focusing our mind or collecting our mind around a wholesome object, then many people complain that they have a hard time to remember things. The other day, it was 2 days ago, Bob came over and helped plant some pots around the monastery, these planting pots that are hanging, and they're very beautiful, and we had several extra ones left over. And so there were like 3 that I hung around my kuti, and it didn't matter how many times it occurred, I kept walking into them because they were right above my vision, and I have an unfortunate habit of tending to look down, or keep my head. Looking down's pretty good, but my head can be kind of looking down as well, so the head is not in I think, a very good position. And bam, I would hit these hanging plants, And I did it one time at night where I couldn't see anything, but it was just that forgetfulness, that sort of like walking around without being mindful of my current experience and knowing, oh, right, I've hit my head on these plants several times, and that's not seeming to teach me very much. They also, you know, it would be expected that I would learn quite quickly because there is a lot of soil exposed on the top, and in fact, some of it was a little bit of manure. And when I would hit them, that would fall on me, and I would not feel very happy in those moments. And the first thing that would come out would often be, "That was so stupid of me." How many of us are aware of that unwholesome train of mind? And then we move into a sense of chiding ourselves and for not being mindful. And of course, we're different than anybody else in the world because everybody else is so mindful and doesn't have these same problems. So this is just a sense of everyday life, where we're constantly able to tune into our own awareness, and other times we're not. And when we're reminded that we repeatedly don't do that in particular situations that can cause frustration, but even worse, can cause injury, then our sense of our own minds gets to be one of frustration. We can feel a lot of frustration, but the problem is that we create a lot of self around this. How could I be so stupid? Why did I do it again? I can't believe this. Now there's manure all over me. And it's not very helpful. I will admit to the most skillful response, which is what I was getting into a little bit with our technology talk, and that was that I just removed the plants. I said, okay, this is enough. 3 times of hitting my head was enough time. And I hung them in a much more beautiful spot. It took a fair amount of effort, but they're actually in a much nicer spot and much higher than my head, but not near my kuti. But I will keep one that isn't in my path there, because there isn't really another space for it. And that's, but I can also use those as reminders of mindfulness for myself. I don't think the 2 that I removed are they're a bit too painful to do that. But the third one that I might hit only rather more infrequently can be a reminder. And of course, I'm also enjoying it because the one that's left over is something that allows me to experience another person's generosity. And when I can bring that to mind as much as possible, then that can bring up quite a beautiful state. And so rather than one of frustration, I'm working on one of, happiness. Even when I hit my head, it's, oh, I've hit my head again on this wonderful object that's been given to me out of generosity. So I can be very thankful of that and Bob's contribution, and then try to take my own responsibility for the loss of mindfulness. But in our day-to-day activities, we do see these as signposts for ourselves, and they're very helpful and important for us to use. Sometimes we do see that we place objects right in our way, and they're really not helpful. It's just obviously like right in the middle of where I walk to the kuti several times a day. I mean, literally, they were in front of the path, just above my forehead. Yeah, it's there's some things that skillfully we need to just remove from our experience, and that can be, as I was talking about from the beginning of the talk, particular technologies that we use, the ways that that distract us. It's just helpful to say, okay, well, I can't be mindful when I'm actually doing this thing, or I can't be mindful when I'm interacting in this way. For some of us, that can be just around talking with people, or particular people in our lives that move into unwholesome ways of speaking. Sometimes we need to limit the time that we're with them. Or if we see that for ourselves we're not able to have wholesome speech when we're around particular people, then we need to possibly limit our time with those people, because we have to develop within ourselves that pause, that sense of, oh, okay, this is not the right thing to say, or it would be better to be more mindful around my speech with this person. We might not be able to do it with them so easily, so we need to take time away to develop that skill, so that when we can be with them later, be with a particular object later that we're relating to, like a plant that's in our way, then we have more mindfulness and we have more of an experience of our own restraint and what is the better thing to be doing in that situation. So removal is one of the ways that the Buddha encourages us. He just says, well, just straight remove it. Remove whatever it is that is possibly causing a problem for you. This doesn't need to be an absolute removal 100%. I'm not suggesting that if somebody has a problem with their husband that they get divorced as the first solution. Although I can understand that would probably come up sometimes for people as a question. But that's, yeah, we have to kind of figure out the skillful means in which we do things with all of our current experiences in our life. And that I'm just talking about seeing that limiting some of the ways that we do things is sometimes better than just thinking I have to be more mindful or I should be more mindful and still engaging with everything that we're engaging in. And this is obvious in terms of like picking up a cell phone. It's like, well, maybe answering emails for 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. is a better way to do it if one can. I mean, other people are working all day long with that kind of technology. So again, just this is a reflection a little bit about how we can tune more into our experience and be aware of our bodies, be aware of what it is that we're observing, the interest that we can have in our experience, the interest we can have in the subtleties of our bodies and our experience and our mind states, and learning to move more into that direction, into the stream of Dhamma, rather than the stream of the world. And with that, we do get to see a lot of rewards, a lot of goodness that arises from our own intentions and attention. And then we kind of are on fire with the Dhamma, as can be said. People say, I'm on fire with the Lord. But when we're on fire with the Dhamma, there is such a kindling of interest that we have that we can feel quite buoyed and happy around that interest. And in fact, we can forego certain things. Like we know maybe we're supposed to go to we've been invited to a party or something, and we thought, oh, maybe I'll just stay in tonight. I think I'm more interested in going in rather than going out. And so we go into our own experiences, our own minds, rather than, going towards the outflows, the asavas of the world. And then we have times when we also want to test our Dhamma experience through challenging ourselves. And sometimes that can be doing something that we're uncomfortable with, like interacting with people when we don't want to, or going to a particular social gathering when we're not interested. For example, we're going to have a garden party tomorrow, and then about 10 days later, 11 days later, we'll have our first yoga samadhi session. And for some people, I think that's concerning, getting together in a closed-in space. But there's, we're doing what we can to protect that. The windows open, air filtration, social distancing, people wearing masks. I'll be in a mask. So, we need to sometimes challenge ourselves, but sometimes we can't get beyond that. Some people might be immunocompromised or something in a situation where they can't actually be around others for the health of their bodies or take that risk. But at other times, I think I'm more talking about when it's not really health related as much as it is like our own sense of fear around being around other people, or that we might not feel up to the challenge, but we do it anyway with an eye on Dhamma, with an ear on Dhamma, and so we're trying to bring the Dhamma in, even though we're moving into situations that aren't necessarily within our comfort zones. So I think that's been enough this morning. If there are any questions people have, please share them. Yes. Karina mentioned something that's quite important that I didn't talk as much about, which is the other side of desire for pleasant experience and around technology, but the difficulty of being with the unpleasant, which I did touch on a bit, but that is often what we're doing with our experience. We are trying to get away with the unpleasantness of boredom, the unpleasantness of not being distracted or our minds not moving. I mean, when we jump from world to world within our own thought process, it's very similar to how we use technology, how we use the internet. And in fact, that's how we're being trained to by all of the people who have created these applications and advertisements. And like, for example, I've read about how Uber became a successful company as they were losing all of their drivers. I think I might be repeating myself. I'm sorry if I am. They were losing their drivers. After about a week, their drivers would quit until they changed the application that their drivers use, the apps on their phones. And basically, at the end of each ride, the drivers before that were needing to check in and look for their next potential ride. Sometimes they'd have to wait, so they think, oh, I'm just going to go home. So there was a gap, and then they were able to be with their own minds and their experience. Oh, I'm not actually wanting to go. But Uber changed that, and for their drivers, because they were losing so many after training them for a week or two, or actually, I don't know how long the training is, but after a week of their just being independent drivers, they'd lose them. And so they decided that at the end of each ride, their drivers would get the next passenger, just come up immediately. So they'd finish their drive, they'd hit that the drive was finished, or however the process works, and immediately they'd get assigned to their next ride. And this stopped the sort of the ability for people to see, like, oh yeah, I actually don't want to keep driving anymore, and or that they want to quit their job because they don't like it very much. And so, yeah, I think because of that, people just are driving all day long. And so that's very similar with how we interact with the internet, for example. We just get this signal, like, what is it? I think YouTube has that. After playing a video, it'll just keep going to the next one, the next one. And I'm guessing this is what a lot of services are doing, is they're just capturing our attention and moving us in there. We don't have time to not be distracted because the people who produce these technologies have figured out a way to keep us going. So the desire is often because we're caught in that loop and we don't really know it, but we also don't want to associate, as Corinna was talking about, with the unpleasant. And we might find that the technologies we use are often a hit of pleasantness, or that we're not getting with just being with our own experience. And so there's a question often that comes about with, why is it that we want to actually put a sort of a pause in around our desire? Why do we want why is it helpful to actually wait? Why is it helpful to see? Because it can seem very unpleasant. And this is, slowing down the gratification, delaying the gratification. And one of the main reasons that we see that is we just see the addictive process of how we're moving away from unpleasant experience and addictively moving towards pleasant experience, because we don't see that being with the unpleasant is actually something that's not just gratifying, but it's quite helpful, and that we can learn that the unpleasant is actually pleasant. This is what essentially Yoniso Manasikara is doing, is that wise attention is actually when we're able to pay attention to our experience, we're able to see that what we are disguising as pleasant really has an unpleasant side to it, and what we are not seeing through the unpleasant is that there is something very pleasant to be gained there. So for example, this is just patiently waiting. People often don't like to wait, and they don't want to exercise their patience because it's so much easier to get things more quickly. But if we can train ourselves to wait, then we see that we don't have to be part of this addictive process to have our desires met right away, because it's often those desires that are getting us into trouble. They're what are creating the dukkha in our lives, just satisfying something very quickly. And we don't see that when we don't do that, when we aren't constantly satisfying our needs for pleasure in the sensual realm, or in the becoming realm, like kind of creating me and mine and everything of who and what I believe myself to be and all of the thoughts there, then we have this sense of space that is created around it, and we see that there is a letting go that can occur, and we don't have to move into our desires, and we don't have to continue to cause ourselves dukkha by seeing that these desires that we think are going to make us feel better for the rest of our life, even though they often only last a few moments, don't really satisfy. They don't keep us ultimately satisfied. And that's what the Buddha's teaching is about, that ultimate satisfaction comes from letting go of what it is that we have believed for all of our life has been keeping us satisfied. Sort of like waking up in the Matrix, so to speak. So we need to learn to deal with the unpleasant, and we need to utilize it in a way that we can eventually learn that it's pleasant being with the unpleasant, because all of us are headed in the same direction. I began this talk around health and the body, but then if you look at it, all of us are going to age and sicken and die, and that's a fact of life. And we're not going to, we are. From the moment we're born, we're aging. From the moment, probably before birth, there's potential to have illness in the womb. And especially after we come out and we're exposed to many things, we can become ill. People can be born with genetic problems. All kinds of things can arise, and it's inevitable. I haven't met anyone yet who has defied death. At least I haven't seen it. Doesn't mean it's not possible, but it's not what the Buddha's taught, and it's not even if we were able to expand life for a very long time, eventually, like, it all collapses. I mean, the universe will not possibly be able to sustain life forever. So no matter what happens, there isn't that sense of being able to have an immortal experience, and we all inevitably go to the same destination, and then part of the Buddhist understanding is that we're reborn again, and we just keep hitting repeat. So when we're able to see that there is a different way of experiencing this repeat, we can get out of it. And in a way, that's what the Buddha's teaching. But I wouldn't call it immortality, because that's not how he taught about Nibbana, because that whole premise would require us to believe that there's something permanent inside of us that is living forever. And that's the kind of conundrum that the Buddha has, and why he didn't want to talk about Nibbana as a sense of immortality, because it just doesn't work that way in terms of the process of what it is to realize Nibbana and how we conceive it. Again, it's something that's out of our current conception without having experienced it. So, yeah, just kind of looking at how we move away from the unpleasant and towards the pleasant, and why we do that. It's very helpful. And then when we're able to gain space around that, we gain quite a lot of insight as well. And that's what allows us to be with dukkha and then transcend dukkha. So it's been over 45 minutes, so I think I'll end the talk there. And I hope that was helpful. And possibly I'll see some of you tomorrow. And then others either next Friday or this Tuesday if you'd like to tune in. So have a good few days for those of you who I won't see. And we'll have one more Tuesday before we move the venue to Yoga Samadhi and see how that goes. And have a pleasant few days without seeking too much of the pleasant. But if it's in the realm of meditation and you're finding that you're experiencing the pleasantness that comes from letting go and a mind that is stilled, then yes, that is the pleasant we want to move towards.